Hello, good evening. My name is Alex McDonald. Thanks for checking this video out. You may be watching it on YouTube or you may be watching it on Facebook. Either way, thank you so much for watching. Something I want to talk about tonight is this idea of raising the debt ceiling and then how dangerous debt is, and then some of the ways that the government is wasting our taxpayers' dollars. And so I try to be very, very optimistic. I'm very excited because I'm not just going to talk about problems. I want to also talk about solutions. And so there's a lot of crazy things going on in the world, and I believe the People's Platform is one of our greatest weapons to fight back against this corruption. Instead of the billionaires getting all this profit, we the people can share the profit among each other. But we can also do some things that could restore our freedoms in this country. And so I'm going to share some of my frustrations and some of my anger towards some of the things that are being said in the media, some of the things that the government's doing. But know that I'm very optimistic, very excited about having a tool to fight back, a weapon that we can use to fight back. But let's get into some of the things that I've been seeing in the media. So they're saying on NewYorkMagazine.com, NYMAG.com, how could Biden end the debt ceiling? He could do it by minting the coin. And so, first off, this is crazy. They begin this article with division. They say congressional Republicans are on the brink of throwing the U.S. economy into a brutal recession. So they're making one party look bad. In the next paragraph, congressional Democrats, meanwhile, are on the brink of doing the same thing. So they're using this article as division. But what we need is unity. So we, the people, should band together and say, no, this doesn't sound good. This doesn't sound right. But let's see some of the things that this person says. This sounds like a synopsis of a satire, but it's actually something happening in D.C. And according to some economic experts, now there's nothing more supremely lodged than the ignorance of experts. So these people are experts. This extraordinarily stupid policy crisis demands an extraordinarily stupid policy solution. This is stupid. So to keep America's finances in order, Joe Biden might need to order the creation of a $1 trillion commemorative coin. Here's a guide to why Congress is locked in a stalemate over raising the debt ceiling, and how the president could raise it on his own, minting the coin, just maybe the only way to prevent the U.S. from defaulting on its debt this fall. So this article goes on to tell us what the debt ceiling is and why raising it is cool and good. Now that makes me want to throw up. Like, raising the debt ceiling is neither cool nor good. So this person writing this article is neither cool nor good. They're promoting stuff that is dangerous and harmful. But let me share something from Orrin Woodward's book, Exposed, and share why it's not cool or good. So I think it's this one right here. So government debts, let me kind of zoom in on this. Maybe not. So government debts are an expense, and we're going to jump around. Sorry about that. And when the government increases its debts, people must pay the price in either higher taxes or inflation, and increasing the money supply discussed later between federal, Social Security, state, and local taxes. Approximately half of workers' paychecks are taken by the government, and this is before the effect of inflation and the loss of the dollar's purchasing power are taken into account. Every time the government promises to do something for the people, like raise the debt ceiling, it must take from the people to do so. Debt, however, allows the government to delay increasing taxes to pay for its commitment and simply borrow the money instead. Needless to say, after decades of kicking the can down the road to avoid the discomfort of raising taxes to pay for political promises, the government is now in a pickle. After all, it now must raise taxes anyway to pay for promises and debts, but the current taxpayers will not receive any benefit for paying the taxes for past generations. So giving money and power to government is like giving whiskey and car keys to teenage boys. Even more dangerous in reality is giving government access to practically unlimited amounts of debt over the last 50 years, because it predictably resulted in our current debt disaster. And so this author of NewYorkMag.com says that debt is cool and good, but here Orrin tells the truth that the people have been eating our children's and grandchildren's apple pie for years, and now we're having to pay for that apple pie and the sugar and the oil and the it's so crazy. So let me share one more piece from Oren's book, Exposed. So Janet Yellen, the Federal Reserve chair, said in April 2020 that we have a strong, well-capitalized banking system. See on page 87. Let me go back. Flip it. There you go. Despite these soothing words and others from the Federal Reserve chair, Jerome Powell, and U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, to name a few, the fractional reserve banks are systematically sick. In 2020, Wall Street veteran Pam Martins observed, the public is increasingly getting curious as to why the New York Fed has had to pump a cumulative $9 trillion in cash to these Wall Street banks since September of last year if they're so well capitalized. Can big banks actually be well capitalized, yet have no liquid money to make loans, the key function of a bank? As we have regularly noted, the Fed's trillions of dollars in cash infusions to the bank began months before there was any COVID-19 outbreak anywhere in the world. And so there you have it. We see that they're running out of money. They're printing it at record rates, but they don't really have any money. So now they got to raise the debt ceiling. Let's go back to this article on New York Mag and see what they're saying about printing the coin. And so most countries, the fiscal policy goes roughly like this. The national legislature passes laws that authorize spending and taxation, and then the government borrows money to cover the gap between the two, which we've been doing for years and years and years. And they're needing to raise the debt ceiling again for the umpteenth million time and print even more money. So the U.S. follows a similar procedure, except our process includes a second step. Long after Congress has already approved deficit increasing budgets, it must take a subsequent vote on whether to allow the Treasury to borrow the funds necessary for meeting its previous demands. This is because America has a statutory limit on how much debt its government is allowed to hold. Maybe some of our smarter politicians put that in place years ago, and our dumber politicians keep trying to go past that so they can pay for stupid stuff. We'll go into some of that stupid stuff they're paying for in just a few minutes after we get through this article. So Congress must therefore raise this debt ceiling whenever the budgets that are already authorized generate debt in excess of previous statutory limits. Thus, raising the debt ceiling does not increase the amount of money that U.S. government owes to its bondholders, which are mostly U.S. citizens. It just prevents the government from having to either default on its debt or else on its statutory obligations to U.S. service members. So this is where you hear, I think it was Nancy Pelosi saying, we won't be able to pay Social Security recipients, Medicaid enrollees, and our soldiers wouldn't know the next time they get a paycheck if we don't raise this debt ceiling. So depending on how high the new debt ceiling limit is set, raising the ceiling can theoretically facilitate future deficit spending. Generally, though, Congress does not raise the debt limit high enough to cover even mandatory spending for very long, and must therefore vote to raise the ceiling again and again every few years, like we've been seeing. But it's trying to say that there's little evidence that America's national debt is dangerously high. But yet, anytime there's debt, somebody's got to pay that debt, which will be future generations. And so if they've been doing this for 60 years, we're now paying that price with rising prices of inflation. We're now paying even greater amounts of taxes. This is insane. And this article is trying to say it's okay. So this is one of the problems with the media. And I bet you this person was probably funded by the Federal Reserve, because look what they say. As a share of gross domestic product, the GDP, Japan's debt level is more than twice as high as America, and the Japanese nevertheless enjoy some of the world's highest living standards and an unemployment rate of below 3%. Now let's talk about Japan. They force people to work these extremely long hours where people pass out while working because they're exhausted, and they even have nets outside of buildings where they work, because people were jumping out of these windows to end their lives because they didn't want to work these jobs in those long hours. And they're not doing great. They're not doing good in whatever sense. And they're trying to say, oh, we're not doing nearly as well as Japan, and Japan has similar debt. So anyways, back to this, which is to say, just because a nation's debt adds up to a very large number does not mean that its debt is unsustainable or economically detrimental. Generally speaking, a country that has been racking up ruinous debt will see its borrowing costs increase as investors lose faith in its capacity to meet its obligations. Now, you know what's crazy about this? Robert Kiyosaki predicts there's going to be a market crash this week. Why? Because they're losing faith in its capacity to meet its obligations. They're losing faith that the country can meet its obligations. Man, so this article is crazy. Okay, let's dive back into it. I think I have it back on the screen. Okay, so even as it added trillions of dollars to its debt, they still have to borrow more money. That is so crazy. So global investors, those with real skin in the game, believe that the U.S. Treasury debt is the safest asset in the world. But they're beginning to think maybe this ain't so safe if they can't even pay their bills. In the estimation, the U.S. government's U.S. economy's growth potential renders Uncle Sam more than capable of keeping up with his interest payments because they can just print more money. So we're not going to read all this crap. It's so stupid. But why Congress hasn't raised the debt ceiling? Whatever. So James Suraki says Democrats should have insisted on abolishing the debt ceiling or raising it by some huge amount 2 years ago. Instead, they handed all the leverage to the GOP. Whatever. These people are so dumb that it hurts my brain, makes me want to throw up in my mouth. But let's get into some of this wasteful spending. This is some funny stuff. And I don't know if you guys are going to laugh, you guys are going to cry, you guys are going to be like, hold on. So here's my idea. Okay, so let's say you and I we're in a family together and we're managing our budget, and we bring in, let's say we bring in $100,000 each. So we got $200,000 coming in the house. It's just the two of us. And then we have these bills that amount to $350,000. And instead of paying those bills with the money we made, we're going to borrow money. We're going to borrow money to pay those bills. But then we're going to be like, oh, let's do some crazy stuff. Let's spend even more. Let's spend even more. Let's spend even more. Let's spend even more. And let's just start printing money. And then let's print more money and print more money. Oh, wait, we can't even keep up with what we're trying to spend on. So let's spend even more money. Let's print more and spend more and print more and spend more and borrow more. It's an insane cycle that's going on in our country, and we must put a stop to it. So my idea is let's just break up with this government. If it's not working out financially, why can't we just break up with them? So here's 20 of the craziest things the U.S. government wastes money on. It's from businessinsider.com. So you're not going to believe some of the things that they're spending money on. So number one, they paid $3 million to the University of California at Irvine to play video games like World of Warcraft. Now, there's plenty of people that would play this game for free, but they gave $3 million. The government gave $3 million for kids to play World of Warcraft. Not children, but grown adults in college to play a video game. Number two, gas emissions from dairy cows. They gave the University of New Hampshire $700,000 to study the farts of cows. To study cow farts. $700,000. Now this one is kind of cool because Grateful Dead's awesome. University of California at Santa Cruz was given $615,000 to digitize photos, t-shirts, concert tickets belonging to the Grateful Dead. But my question is, why did it cost so much to digitize this stuff? And couldn't you find some fans that would do it for free? They did some studies on e-dating, $239,000 to study how Americans use the internet to find love. Super dumb. The National Science Foundation spent $216,000 to study whether or not politicians gain or lose support by taking ambiguous positions. They studied male prostitutes in Vietnam. The National Institutes of Health spent almost $500,000 to study the behavior of male prostitutes. Approximately $1 million of U.S. taxpayer money was used to create poetry for the Little Rock, New Orleans, Milwaukee, and Chicago zoos. The goal of the poetry is to help raise awareness of environmental issues. So why does it cost $1 million to create poetry for animals? So the government has all these buildings that are empty and vacant. And guess what? They got to maintain them. they're spending $175 million during 2010 to maintain these buildings that they're not even using. They're not putting homeless people in them. They're not using them for charity. They're not using them for anything but to have them be vacant. This includes a pink octagonal monkey house in the city of Dayton. So there's $1.8 million of U.S. taxpayer dollars went for a museum of neon signs in Las Vegas. $35 million reportedly paid out by Medicare to 118 phantom medical clinics that never even existed. Now, this really confuses me. So they paid $35 million to fake clinics. This one's kind of okay. The Conservation Commission of Moncton, Vermont got $150,000 from the federal government to construct a critter crossing. Thanks to U.S. government money, the lives of thousands of migrating salamanders are being saved. So they go and they create these land bridges over highways and stuff like that. And I can see how that might cost $150,000. And not super mad about that, but there's a lot of government waste that's not even being covered in here. So $440,000 in California to provide green energy upgrades on a building that has not been used for a decade. So you guys remember Dennis Astor, the former Speaker of the House? $440,000 was spent this past year on an office for the former Speaker of the House that he rarely even visits. So he's like, I need upgrades to my office. It's going to cost $440,000. Like, oh yeah, no problem. We got all the money in the world. Go ahead, pay for it. So then they paid $5,000 at a library for a host of video game parties. There's plenty of people that have video games that they'll donate for free at a library. This is crazy. So the U.S. Census Bureau spent $2.5 million on a television commercial during the Super Bowl that was so poorly produced that virtually nobody understood what it was trying to say. $2.5 million in commercial. Then the professor of Dartmouth College received $137,000 to create a recession-themed video game titled Layoff. Let me ask you this. Have you heard of the game Layoff or a recession-themed video game? No. So the guy got $137,000 to create a joke. Then they created a zoo video game, $600,000, Wolf Quest. And then a pizzeria in Iowa was given $60,000 to renovate the pizzeria's facade and give it a more inviting feel. The U.S. Department of Agriculture gave one enterprising group of farmers $30,000 to develop a tourist-friendly database of farms that host guests for overnight haycations. And then, last but not least, $800,000 was given to study the impact of a genital washing program on men in South Africa. So they studied the impact of men in South Africa washing their genitals. So these politicians could wash their own genitals and study it on their own in their own minds, but instead they gave $800,000 to study how it went when these South African men washed their genitals. Now that is stupid. Now there's a lot of other things we could cover in this video, a lot of other wasteful spending. One way that I think we could cut the spending is, we got all these politicians making $435,000 a year while they're in office, and they don't have enough money to pay for all the crap they want to spend money on. So how about, because they get money from lobbying, because they have investments, because most of them are multimillionaires anyways, why don't they give up their income and say for the next 4 years, we're not going to accept an income. Maybe some of the more impoverished ones like AOC and whoever else is struggling financially, they can keep their incomes. But instead of them collecting these incomes, how about they give that up until we can figure out how to solve this debt crisis? We can figure out how to control our spending. So if you and I, we have this home and we have this income that's coming in, we have this budget that's exorbitant, what we would do is probably we would try to scale back some of that income. One of the studies I saw was they gave, I think, $4 million to study the use of cocaine in a certain animal and how their sexual behavior would be. And so, like, if you and I had this budget, we would probably give up the cocaine in order to pay for our rent, to buy groceries, to pay the different expenses that we had. Or we would just be like the cocaine addicted crazy person that keeps on using drugs and destroys their whole life, which is what our government's doing. And so I think it's time we break up with our government, get them all out of office, start all over, and we create a lean budget until that we can figure this out. Because we don't need to continue this crazy exorbitant spending, and we don't need to be manipulated saying, oh, it's the Republicans' fault, it's the Democrats' fault. It probably is both of their faults. But we don't need you in the paper saying it's this fault, it's this fault, fight against each other, fight against each other. Like, we need unity right now. And so one of the ways we can have unity is through the People's Platform. It's an economic opportunity where we can gather together. We can use a platform where we can get amazing perks. And instead of the profits being shared with these billionaires, the profits are shared among the people. And eventually we're going to have the people's money in it. And so I'm super excited about the People's Platform and what it can do for our country, what it can do for us politically. And as we become more educated, more people reading that book, Exposed by Orrin Woodward, understanding the detrimental effects of debt, we can look at articles like we saw on nymag.com and say, that's stupid. Debt is not cool and good. And these people are wrong. When we get more people understanding that, thinking that, speaking out against that, and starting to make different choices, then we could start to make this country a much more prosperous place for everyone. Instead of inflation hurting many, we can have prosperity for many and us living our best lives every single day, having the most wonderful country ever that's full of freedoms. And so I appreciate you checking out this video. I had a lot to say. I think this is one of my longer videos. I think I said some rude stuff about our government, but they need to hear what we think, that they are acting like a bunch of buffoons, and we need to end this debt crisis. We need to end this exorbitant spending, and we need to have unity right now. So I invite you to come be a part of the People's Platform. Get a hold of me. You can contact me through the comments. And if you want the billionaires to continue to profit, there's nothing wrong with that. It's kind of like an IQ test. Like, do I want my neighborhoods, my friends, and my families to have more prosperity, or do I want the 2,300 billionaires that increased their net worth by $4 trillion in a year during COVID? Do I want them to continue to like prospering at our detriment, or do I want the people to prosper? And so if you defend those billionaires, then I don't have anything to do with you at this point, and I don't need to talk to you, because that's not the world that I envision. But I believe in unity, so I'm going to be on your side no matter what. I'm going to be able to listen to you and be open to your ideas. And so I appreciate you listening to these ideas. I hope you have a wonderful night, and I'll talk to you soon. I'll see you at the top. So I'll see you real soon. Love you guys.